Nadia is an affiliate PhD. So we've got launched this year as well, affiliate PhD program, whereby the student stipend is not funded by the centre, but they are supervised by a chief investigator and they're doing research that is highly aligned. And so we've opened up our network and our resources and our community to those PhD students. And Nadia is one of those affiliate PhD students. So thank you, Nadia.
Okay. So hopefully this isn't controversial since we're in Sydney. So I'm going to start with the Sydney Opera House. So due to stakeholder miscommunication, the construction of the Sydney Opera House itself was delayed by a decade. In turn, the design for the Sydney Opera House had also cost 1,300% more than what was intended. So how could we have better supported such stakeholder miscommunication and in turn reduce the amount of time and cost spent on such a large and public-scale architectural design project? Alright, so good afternoon everyone. My name is Nadia Anam and I am a first-year PhD candidate from Swinburne School of Design and Architecture, as well as an affiliated PhD, as Ivana has explained in ARC menu. So, supervised by Associate Professor Charlie Ranscombe, as well as Dr. Linus, my PhD project seeks to explore how we can better support such stakeholder miscommunication, specifically through a focus on streamlining designer-to-client interactions in architecture, as well as in the new age of image Gen AI, where the instant translation of text into images have been enabled. So ultimately, the immediate impact of such research explorations are that designers are, one, better supported to visualize large volumes of design options in a shorter period of time, while non-designers are enabled to greater contribute into a design project with little to no traditional design skills to do so. And ultimately, such research endeavors seek to reduce the amount of time and cost spent, once again, on architectural design projects, while still ensuring that clients' needs and preferences are still met. So, wouldn't it be nice if our clients could actually visualize design ideas for us? Well, unfortunately, such stakeholder miscommunications are still occurring to this day. In fact, there remains a great level of linguistic ambiguity in the language used during the early consultation meetings, especially between architectural designers and non-design client stakeholders. But the greater challenge is that such linguistic ambiguities often lead to the multiple instances of misunderstandings and design errors that unfortunately only begin to emerge during the later and more critical stages of the architectural design process. So hence, through such challenges, my research project seeks to explore how we can better support such stakeholder miscommunications, specifically through the use of image Gen AI, as well as the creation of a model and a toolkit for the best practice use of image Gen AI in the architectural design process. So what I've done so far is pretty much delved into literature, first on design processes in architecture, and looking at the various iterative, divergent, and convergent stages of design. Looked at architectural design visualizations, looking at the distinct types of interactions and conversations that occur between the stakeholders as well as the designers, as well as design cognition, looking at the highly individualized acts of externalizing and interpreting different design ideas in multiple different ways. So from the literature review, there are 3 gaps that have emerged. The first one was that there was a lack of understanding on the iterative and collaborative design processes engaged with between designers and non-designers. The second looked at the imbalance between the maximization of design efficiency and value of creative expression when new and emerging technologies are explored in research and then implemented into practice, which then ultimately result into the third gap, which talks about the little exploration that is being conducted in both research and in practice on the use of image Gen AI and how we can misuse it, as well as use it in order to accommodate for communication purposes. So from the gaps in mind, my research question asks, how can image Gen AI support architects and clients during the design process for innovative and creative public space design ideas? And thus, 3 different objectives were also defined for my research project. So the first one is formulation, specifically of the image Gen AI supported architectural design process model. A little bit wordy, but we'll fix on that later. The next one is development of an image and AI supported architectural design toolkit. And then the last one is to validate the actual practical application of the developed model and toolkit in a more natural practice-based setting. So based on these three objectives, I also divided my research into three key phases. So the first one includes a literature review and auto-ethnographic study, which pretty much means that I, as a researcher, explored different Gen AI uses and mapped it towards the literature findings that I already looked into, as well as an experiment. The second phase looks at an artifact creation, so that's the creation of the actual design toolkit itself. And then the last phase is a case study where we take the model and the toolkit and take it into practice and work with individual groups of clients and architects and see whether that's actually engaging them with image and AI and improving their communication. So thus far, what I've been able to produce from the PhD itself is a preliminary image and AI supported architectural design process model. So that is the first phase of the research. So in this model, what has been captured is ultimately the prompting, variating, and selecting acts of designing with image Gen AI, as well as the externalization and interpretation acts of designing with visual images, and then, of course, capturing the iterative, divergent, and convergent processes of architectural design. So what's left for me to do? Well, I am still seeking ethics approval and finalizing the methods. But I will soon begin the process of participant recruitment early next year for the experiment and the case study here. So during such experiments and case studies, individuals like yourselves, so practitioners, as well as perhaps clients of yours, will be able to get opportunity to use and experience image Gen AI in a semi-guided / guided process of externalizing and interpreting architectural design ideas, specifically so that what you are generating reflects exactly what you intend your design ideas to convey to another person. So if you are interested, there's a QR code here and there's also a QR code on the posters itself. But if you are interested to learn more about the model toolkit, or if you're interested in participating in any of the studies, please do scan the QR code here. And I guess that's the end, but thank you for listening to the presentation and I look forward to discussing.
Thank you, Nadia. Any questions, comments? Yep.
Thanks, Nadia. I'm very interested with AI, and obviously we work together at Swinburne. I'm curious around a similar question from a previous presenter. What's your proposed outcome and how can we leverage off that? And I say that in the context where AI is going to be another toolkit for architects. And I look at visual renderings, which is prominent in your theme here. I did a lot of renderings in the early 2000s for architects that would take a month, photorealistic renderings on 3D Studio Max that looked amazing. I was proud of them. You can now do them in a minute. So it's like when CAD replaced manual drawings for architects, and those that weren't sort of technologically savvy got left behind. For you, being able to position the use of AI for image generation to help revolutionize the next phase of architecture, I'm curious, is it more focusing on the prompts or is it the actual clarity of image? A bit of a conversation around your proposed outcomes to really benefit this industry. Because it's here to stay, it's not to be ignored, and I think it's a great project. Thank you.
So I guess in terms of whether I'm looking at prompts or the visual outcome itself, it's a bit of both, because the outcome of the project, the intent is to have a sort of toolkit, and what that toolkit will encompass may be a physical toolkit with a workflow or some sort of like a guidebook almost, or it could almost, I think, Mark Burry, when I had a chat with him, he talked about gamifications and looking at making it more of a game between architects and clients. But in terms of looking at prompts and visuals, a little bit of both. So that toolkit intends to be given to the architect firms themselves, and essentially they can be able to, during consultation meetings, conduct sort of prompting and sort of visual generation with the clients there live. And in a way that means that the toolkit should guide them in the ways that they should prompt in the best ways and what sort of visuals you would get out of specific types of prompt patterns or generations, stuff like that. So yeah.
I think I have two questions. The first is how your research will track this technology when it evolves so quickly over the next 2 or 3 years. So I imagine what you speculate on tomorrow will be very different to what the tools we're actually using in 3 years' time. So I think that process of evolving your own thinking along with the tools will be really fascinating and something you'll need to watch. The other part is how you start to break down, how you start to map emergent technologies against the different design process stages. So, for example, at work at the moment, we find that AI is somewhat useful for effectively creating flavor boards and generating really conceptual ideas, and it's less beneficial for mapping onto later design stages. So, for example, where you have a site or a massing, it becomes more limited. I think it'd be really interesting as an architect to see those tools, and I think these tools, I think, will develop naturally anyway. The industry will generate them, but maybe your research could capture some of the some of that further definition of AI tools. So you're not just entering word prompts, but you might be entering sketches or massing models. So we already at work we have our own AI generator that can do that. You can put in a sketch and it can start to count the number of floors and give you more specific responses. But I think that will be another really fascinating part, because it's not just going to be clearly word prompts. Ability to enter data and ideas is going to be, I think, far more comprehensive over the next year or two.
So I guess first question in terms of tracking. Right now I have sort of like a matrix just keeping up with all the different image and open source platforms that are coming out. So that's sort of how I'm just keeping track of everything that's coming up. But in terms of, I guess, having both textual and image prompts, so that, I don't know if I can go back. But this little model here, so that looks at both text and image prompt inputs. So that's already starting to consider how perhaps the architects, we always talk in sketches and they can then input images as opposed to text, which the clients would instead input into a different design idea that they can then interpret throughout that meeting, I guess. But yeah.
I think this will be the last question.
I mean, it's obviously a very hot topic, right? I think there's certain assumptions that people still work in two-dimensional information in practice, actually. And there's, I think, many who would disagree with that. So that's maybe something to look at, because there's lots of platforms that are now being developed specifically by architects for architects. I mean, anybody who's now using a so-called Grasshopper platform that was actually done by an architect, which became very specific, understanding the kind of, constraints around what is required for that practice. So I think it's worth looking maybe not just two-dimensional information about that. And there's lots to talk about this. I think anybody who does any research in AI should be familiar with Meredith Broussard's work. I'm not sure if you know of her. She wrote a very fantastic, very thin book. You can read it probably in a day, which is called Architectural Unintelligence, which is a very critical position about, because it also explains a lot about the bias in those data sets. And there's not much developed for architects at the moment in terms of the data that's used to train these. So I would just recommend for you to read that book, because it might also question some of your assumptions around the technology as well. Yeah.
All right. Thanks, Nadia.